President. As Abraham Avri Ravid to give our presidential speech, I also like to welcome our two panelists, Zhiguo He and Nadia Malenko, who are both of whom are served as academic directors at AFA. Avri, as you know, is our president. He's a C. Sims Professor of Finance at Yeshiva University. He was a professor of finance at Rutgers and in Israel before he joined Yeshiva. Avri has held lots of visiting positions throughout his long and productive career, including Chicago Booth, Cornell, Wharton, NYU, Columbia, UCLA. Professor Ravid has published more than 50 refereed articles in virtually all top finance journals and top economic journals, such as the QJE and the Bell Journal. He has served on several editorial boards, and he currently serves as a co-speaker of the Yeshiva University Senate. Avri's research interests include corporate finance, innovation, and application of corporate finance and IO to the media industries. His research was featured in major media outlets, including the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, NPR, CNBC, BBC, Financial Times, Hollywood Reporter, and other media around the world. I guess I could go for another 20 minutes, but I'm running out of my breath with all of the achievements that Avri has. So without further ado, let me give the floor to Professor Ravid.
Thank you very much, Hanji, for the very kind word. First of all, I apologize for the quality of the picture. My webcam actually failed for the first time ever 5 minutes ago. So this is what we have. I hope it's not, it's not going to be a bad thing for the future, and the rest will go very nicely. So thank you, Hanji, for the kind word. I actually have been the longest serving MFA president because, as you know, and thank you for all of us for sticking around with us, we have done the conference. The conference was planned for March. We moved it to August, and now here we are, virtual. As Hanji said, I've been around for a while, and I've worked in several areas. I have quite a few theory papers I'm proud of. I have papers in debt, all with great co-authors that I'm very happy about. And I'm now working, for example, in a new exciting paper on ambiguity and innovation with two co-authors, Yudi Zakian and my colleague, Gabriela Koikulesko. However, in recent years, I've been spending much of my time on human capital. And I've actually another paper that I'm not going to talk about with my colleague, Coach John, and Balbinder Singh, who's a doctoral student at Temple. But much of my work, let me put on the first slide. Hopefully, this will work. So I'm gonna try to share my screen here. Okay, and so I'm gonna talk, and let me move here from the current slide. And I'm going to talk about finance, human capital, discrimination, and the creative industries. So I've been spending quite a lot of time on the creative industries. And the reason is that I think human capital is central to finance. People trade, people run corporations, people work in corporations. And behind every return generating process, we should remember that they're human decisions. So incentives, ability, effort, career concerns are critical issues to any economic enterprise. So I'm going to talk about three simple experiments that we have done and show how the creative industries could provide insights into important questions the profession has been asking and debating now for several years. So finance has worried about human capital for a while. We got theory papers and here and also in the rest of the literature review. I'm going to talk about just a small subset of the paper. So I apologize for all the many co-authors who have done great work, and I will not get to mention them. So those are two of the well-known human capital and finance papers, Hard and Moore and Jensen Murphy, that talk about career concerns. Recent years, there's been a lot of empirical work, and I'm just showing you a few of the papers and COs. The work started with Bertrand and Shore 2003, but right now there are several published papers, all in good journals, and quite a few working papers. I'm showing here papers by Daniel Wolfensohn, Renee Adams, Per Stromberg, and Raghu Rao, among others, that have looked at the value of CEOs and lead employees to corporations and how we measure this, which is a very big problem. Stars have fascinated economists since Rosen, and that's a long time ago. And we have here several papers that have looked at it in finance, Malmendier and Tate, Gabet and Londier, and this paper by Grossberg et al., which talks about star analysts. So star concept is important as well. And finally, last but not least, we're going to talk about gender, race, and age discrimination. That has been a really growing topic in finance. We're going to talk about it, about one of the experiments, and there has been a huge growth, and most of it is recent. So I'm showing papers by Renee Adams, Egan et al., a new paper by Hebert that was presented in the NBR this summer, and a published paper by Mike Owens and Rick Townsend, paper with Gornell and Strobelayev that is all working papers. So a lot of people are working on this right now. So why am I interested in the creative industries? The creative industries could be a wonderful laboratory and can provide new insights. Why is that? Because in the creative industries, it's relatively easy to assign people to projects. And we have extensive data about the projects themselves, about key participants. And this is generally not available in other industries. So if you start a new line of cosmetics, you probably don't know, who is responsible, what are their career concerns, what are their incentives, what is the economics of this line. We don't get a lot of reporting on these kinds of projects. But in the creative industries, we have a lot more information. We can test quite a few theories. We know who's behind every film, every theater show. We have relevant financial data. We have quality assessment, that is to be reviews. And we also know everything about these people. So we can look at career concerns, we can assign people to projects, and we can test theories that are related to that. Now, the only comparable industry, I should say, is the biotechnology, but there are differences. And if you're interested, there's in the same issue of the RFS 2008, David Robinson and we have a paper. We talk about the movie industry. David talks about biotechnology, and they're essentially in the same context of alliance, so you can see the differences. But the creative industries do have a lot of information that others don't have. Creative industries are big. So if you think, okay, well, we're just talking about, little projects, that's not true. I'm just giving you the Avengers Endgame, which I don't know if you've seen, I haven't seen it, but it had a budget of over $350 million, revenues close to $3 billion. So basically, what does it mean? It would fit comfortably as a large firm in the Russell 2000. So it's a big project. Theater shows have become large as well. Hamilton, for example, cost $12.5 million. Weekly running costs in the hundreds of thousands, gross $650 million. And if you want the biggest, so Phantom of the Opera has been running for many years. It's now probably around $5 billion total, and it is still running. It's actually running these days only in South Korea, but hopefully when Broadway renews, it will go back to Broadway. So those are big and very significant projects, so we can learn about things. So I'm going to talk about three experiments, one that's just published, one in a working paper, and revision will be available in SSRN hopefully very, very soon. And one is work in progress. The first study is the precise assessment of the value of human capital to the theater. And I'll tell you how we did it and why we think it could be generalized. This is co-authored with Shu Han. You see the picture. I guess it's on the left or on the right, depending on how this looks. She's my colleague at SIMS. The second paper talks about age and gender discrimination in the film industry. And I'll tell you also why I think it could be generalized. And this is with Shu Han as well. The third paper considers technology adoption with career concerns. Again, the movie industry. This is with Filippo Mizzanotti. You see the picture at Kellogg, Northwestern. And we think it's also a unique lens. So we had quite a few people who helped us in these projects. I would like to thank in particular my daughter, Sarah, and my son, Oren, who helped in all three projects, in coding, collecting data, with institutional context. We have Grant Goering at Kellogg, who is helping us a lot with the third project, and quite a few short-term, very able RAs at SIMS. So let me talk about the first experiment. And that is, in principle, if you want to think about it, you want to measure the value of a key player to an organization. And now that's very difficult to do because things change a lot and change in time, and it's very difficult to control for everything. So if you want the ideal experiment, what would be the ideal experiment for such a measure, for such measurement? It would be, you take a firm, you run it with one CFO, then the firm goes through all kinds of events, then you rewind time and run the same identical firm through an identical event with another CFO, and then you compare the performance. That would be a controlled experiment, everything will be good, except of course it's not possible. Now in the theater, that's pretty close to possible. And this is the experiment that we have in management science just this year with Shu Han. So here's the experiment. Think about a show. I'm just showing the poster for How to Succeed in Business. We take one of the lead actors and we switch with another lead actor. Same show, same everything else, same actors, same directors, same physical theater, same lines. Everything is controlled for. We just switch one person. So we should be able to see what is the value of this person to the organization. And the generalization is because it's so restricted, then basically, if it matters here, it should matter in much less restrictive environment. So we start with all shows between 1990 and 2013. We have weekly performance data. We look at average ticket prices, attendance, and revenues 3 weeks before the transition, compared with 3 weeks after the transition. And notice almost everything is controlled for. So here are the results. We take one person, replace with another person. As you'll see, it is a star, what we call a theater star. And what happens? We get another $151,000. Now, $151,000 is a lot because the average running, adjusted for inflation, the average running, average revenue is about 750. And if you like tables, so here's a table. So we divide up the population of actors into 4 types. We have what we call theater star, and I'll talk about it in a minute. We have movie star, visibility star, and then everybody else. So what you can see in what I highlighted is that when you switch from non-star to a theater star, you have higher capacity change, means more attendance, higher ticket prices, and higher gross as well. This is not happening for movie stars and visibility stars, which are essentially celebrities, but only for theater stars. And, depending on how you run the regressions, the numbers could change, but the order of magnitude is indeed about 150, 130 out of 750, which is a big number. Now, how do we define theater stars? Theater stars are essentially people with two Tony nominations. We have a lot of robustness checks, so there are different ways to define it, but it's all about being decorated person in the industry who has been vetted, who has been going through the industry for a long time and has shown their worth. So we have established that those are the people who make a difference. And in addition to just establishing a clear value to human capital, which I think is the main thing here, it's to show how you can do it. And when you do it in very controlled environment, you see that human capital matters quantifiably. So it should matter in other environments as well. We have something to say about stars. There has been a long debate about stars going back to Sherwin Rosen, and it has come to finance with papers by Mamandir-Te, Gabay, and Landier, and Groisberg, as I said. And our paper seems to suggest that the star who matter are what I would call McDonald star. Now, what are McDonald star? This goes back to a paper by McDonald in '88, which talks about, it's a two-period model. First period, you don't know who you are. You're trying a new profession. You don't make a lot of money. Period two, you find out that you're a star, and then you reap all the benefits. So stars are people who are vetted through the industry, who are decorated, who are shown to be able to do things, as opposed to people who are created by demand and fans, as in models by Rosen and Adler. They're all AERs in the 80s. And these guys could have very little talent. We claim that we show that those are people who do have much more talent. So far, we see that human capital matters by this experiment in a quantifiable way. And again, the generalization would be that if in such controlled environments, it makes a difference. So think about the regular organizations, the usual things, organizations we think about, players have a lot more leeway. And of course, they should matter as well. So we talked about stars, and I said that movie stars don't matter. Now, movie stars seem not to matter also for movies. This was my big discovery 20 years ago, Journal of Business. The press loved it around the world and in the US. So how are these studies consistent? What do I make of the fact that, movie stars don't seem to matter, but theater stars matter to theater? So first, the experiment with the theater is better. In the movie star paper, and by the way, it's been validated in other papers later as well, that movie stars don't make a difference to the financial performance of movies. So in the movie studies, I use fixed effects, similar to some of the CO studies. So it's not as finely tuned. I cannot run a movie with a star and a movie without a star and compare them. And I can do that in the theater. And the other thing, I think, which leads us to the other two studies I would like to talk about, is that in movies, stars are not such key players. I mean, I don't know if you've seen the movie Roma, which won an Academy Award, was all non-professional actors, won an Academy Award, and there are other examples of such movies. Now think about non-professional actors, the people on this call, showing up in Broadway and doing a musical. I think that's absolutely, I'm sure it will not good. Maybe some people in this call, but not for me. And so they're different. Theater is different than movies. And here I want to talk a little bit about film directors. So actors in the movies are not project managers or CO equivalents. So we can talk about, in the first experiment, we talked about a key player in an organization, but not a manager. Now, film directors, on the other hand, are essentially project managers in the industry, not film producers. So those of you who don't know much about the industry might think that the film producers are the ones who run the show. They finance the show, and I could talk a lot about producers, and I do talk in the several papers that I've done on film directors, talk about the distinction, which is not so clear to people outside the industry. But the film director is essentially responsible for completing projects that, as we said, cost hundreds of millions of dollars on time, within budget, and in a good, hopefully excellent, creative and economic point of view. So, okay, so they're the ones who run it. So maybe we could look at film directors and learn about a lot of the research that starts with somebody has a project, somebody runs a project, and what happens next. I should also add that much of the money spent in movies is on principal photography. So that takes, a couple of weeks to a couple of months. So you really have to be a good manager. You can't just, wing it if you're a film director. So the next two experiments use film directors' data. And what I'm tying to in terms of the literature is the literature about creative leaders and managers and CEOs. There's a whole literature in CEOs, and I'm sure I'm not doing justice to the literature in this side and in the side before. Problem is CEOs don't move very often. Firms is a multitude of projects, ever-changing environments. So it's very hard to measure. And importantly, we usually do not have in industry assignable project data. So we don't know who is running a specific project and when what exactly the specific project has done. Now in the movies, we can follow film directors' careers. We have detailed data on each project and on each director. So we can look at some related questions, and hopefully it has wider implications. I'm sure more can be done, and those of you who are interested, hopefully you will do it as well. Okay, so film directors, let me just give you a little bit of a background. This comes a lot from work that I've done with Coast John and Jayanti Sundar and was published in Journal of Corporate Finance 2017. It's unlike what people think about Hollywood. This is a rational and brutal industry. So keep in mind, you're giving someone $100 million to play with. So that's not great if they don't do a good job. So you really want them to do a good job, and you're really concerned if they don't. So what we have shown in that paper is that the hiring is totally based on the success of the movies, the average success of the movies on your career. 60 to 80%, depending on the sample, of directors make only one movie and drop out. That's because the movie was not successful enough and nobody's going to give them another $100 million to play with. In one of my samples, 90% of the people made 2 movies, and that's it. As I said, the probability of hiring depends on your success, and which is measured by the financial and artistic success of the project, quality of the project, and an experienced directors can really increase the value of movies. We've shown all of this. They are the value drivers in movie projects, and that's why I think we can generalize it to other industries. So one thing about the data set for Coast John, the paper with Coast John, included directors who started their careers in the 80s. In the new data set, in the paper I'm going to talk about right now, we have data on directors that started from 95 to 2005. So those are non-intersecting data sets, no overlap, not a single director overlaps, no single movie. And yet the patterns are exactly the same. So I'm pretty confident that this is actually what's going on in the industry. So let me talk about the second experiment. So this is work with Shuhan. There's tons of work on gender and race discrimination in finance. Age discrimination is a little bit less popular. Now, what we're doing here is very simple. Again, both are very simple experiments. When you talk about it and then you spend 2 or 3 years collecting data, running the regressions, nothing works out, you do it again, and finally, hopefully you get something. So what is the experiment? Since we know everything about these directors and their films, we can consider the thought experiment of two people that have identical careers. So we control for the career, we control for the success, the achievements, but they differ in gender, race, or age. And then we see who is hired next for a project. And what we hope is that variables, in our case, dummy variables, usually of gender, race, or age, will not make any difference, but we obviously find they do. Otherwise, we wouldn't have a paper here, or perhaps we would have a different paper. We couldn't do much about race because, unfortunately, the sample doesn't include enough minority directors, but we do talk about gender and age. And the research design allows us to eliminate statistical discrimination and focus. I think it's, there's a lot of discussion about what exactly it is, but I think we're closest to stereotype or taste-based. And I'm referring to the paper by Schleifer, a well-known paper by Schleifer, and again, the paper by Hebert that was presented at the NBR this summer. So what is the institutional background? So there's a lot of talk about women directors. And if you just read anything about this industry, they claim there are not enough women directors. And this director, Daniel Lesovich, that was nominated for awards in Cannes Festival 2019, when it still ran as a festival, was canceled this year. She said that situation is not good, but it is improving. So let us see. There's talk about Hollywood and age. Jane Fonda, whom you might know, a very famous actress, talked about a film that she tried to make, and she said that ageism is alive and well. And Lloyd Robinson, you see his photo, well-known talent agents, says it's not just about actors, it's not just about screenwriters, it's about directors as well. So we will see. So what is the research design? We actually scan the 400,000 directors that appear in IMDb and identify first-time directors for the periods 95 to 2015. So everybody who started, and you can, of course, discuss this a little more. What is a director? What is a film? There are shorts, there are all kinds of other films that count. So we made some decisions which I think are reasonable. And we follow these directors, the ones who started their careers between 95 and 2015, from the first film they made until 2018 or until they drop out of the sample. We collect information about these directors before, during, and if applicable, after their career as directors. And we have all project information about films, including budgets, revenues, reviews, film characteristics. And that's what we are using in order to test this experiment that we said. And again, the experiment is to look at control for career and see if people are hindered by their gender or age. So the pros, people are hired one project at a time, which is good because, if you're in a firm and you develop product lines, you just stay in the firm. Here you're hired one project at a time. And we actually believe we have all the information that's relevant, that's available to industry. So you can't say there's a lot of hidden information that people know and they make their decision. That's not true. We have almost everything they should be looking at. And also, it's real money. It's not lab experiments. So paper has a descriptive part. We're on logit regressions, on the probability of being hired. We have many robustness checks. We have an IV. But I'll focus about one or two major findings. So hopefully you can see this table. This is part of the descriptive part of the paper. So here's the interesting thing. You see that the average number of new women directors is about 12% of the total. So the average percentage is about 12%, and there's no real secular trend. So for example, if you look at 2014, 17% of the cohort are women, but in 2015, it's back to 7. So unlike finance, for example, where there's an increase in the number of women over time, here it doesn't seem to be the case. And interestingly, 12% is exactly the number. There are a lot of reports about women in industry, and I've looked at a lot of the institutional material. So they say that there's only 12% of the movies, top 100 movies in 2019 were directed by women. 12%, the same percentage. So I think it gives you a little bit of an idea of what the problem with the dearth of women directors is, which is they don't really enter the profession in sufficient numbers. Now, there may be reasons. Why is it that very few women enter the profession? And there's a lot of literature about it. There's risk aversion, competitive, job requirements. Those of you who listened to Claudia Golden's Feldstein lecture in the NBR this summer, she talked about job requirements, jobs that are not compatible with family. We cannot test these ideas directly, but we do document this dearth of first-time women directors. And also, we looked at the career paths. So directing is not a starting position in general. People enter at age 39. So there's a little bit of a different career path. We don't know yet what to make of it, but the most distinct difference is that women enter with fewer years of experience behind them and less diverse set of skills before they direct their first movie. But once they enter, and I'll show you one table, we have 10 tables with a lot of columns in the paper. But once they enter, the female dummy variable is almost never significant for the probability of hiring when we control for everything else. It does seem that women might need better reviews to proceed. So there's some interaction that we did that shows that. And for experienced directors, there might be some preference even for women. And for age, it's a different story. So here is a table. This is, again, part of table 4, not intentionally, but just the way it worked out. So what you see on top in red is the female dummy. In other words, are you a female or a male? And you see that it's really not, it's insignificant, and that's consistent in the rest of the work. The next set of variables, sequence, average return, average user rating, average Metascore, all quality indicators and performance indicators of the film, and they're all significant, as they should be. This is how you're hired. If you have sequence, means the number of films you've done, average return and average user rating, average Metascore, I don't think need a lot of explanation. But if you're doing well, you've done well, you'll get hired. Female or male don't make a difference, but you see age. Age, it's the bottom here. Age is always negative and significant. This is totally consistent in one of the regressions. Those of you who are looking at it, number 5, it's negative and insignificant. That's because the interactions, which you don't see, there's below that, there are quite a few control variables for directors, films, and interactions. The interaction is very negative. So it's still negative for age, no matter how we run it. So let me show you some illustrations of that. So this is what you see here is a graph. And this, what I plot here on the horizontal axis, you see the average return of your movie. So this is the average over your previous career, and the numbers don't matter. We can talk about them, but we scale them so it looks a little better and so on. On the vertical axis, you see the predicted probability of being hired. The top line, which is blue, if you can see in your computer, is for directors age 26. The red one, which is the next one down, is for directors age 42. And the bottom one is for directors age 58. So what do we see here? We see that and everything else is kept at their mean, I should say. So what you see here is that for the younger directors, everything happens as it should. As your average return increases, you're more likely to land another job. Now, for the older folk, well, that doesn't seem to make any difference. And by the way, older is not that old. 58 is, well, I don't think 58 is old for other reasons. But within this industry, you enter at 39, so 58 is not really old. We did it by standard deviations, but 58 is not really old. And as you can see, it really doesn't help you if you are doing better. You're not more likely to get hired. The next one is perhaps more striking. So we played with several functional forms, and this is quadratic. So you can see this shows you the probability of being hired by age, and everything else again is kept at their mean. So as the director goes from 40 to 55, the probability of being hired goes down by half. And again, 40 is when you enter, more or less. And by the way, when we ran these robustness checks, there's age discrimination under age 50. So keep in mind, you enter the profession 39, 50, there's already age discrimination. So this we find is quite interesting. And by the way, you may think that people retire. So they don't. I'm just telling you, we checked everybody who dropped out of the sample. They generally don't retire. They go back to what they were doing before, or they change profession. One of them became, I believe, a yoga instructor. Another went to finance. But these are the only two. The rest of them just went back to what they were doing before. They failed in that. They just went back to something else. And also film directors, you might think they're sitting by their pools in Malibu. That's not really true. They don't make a lot of money. I mean, some of them do. Martin Scorsese does, but a lot of them make salaries that are comparable to successful finance professors. And also, if you're concerned about statistical discrimination, older people make on average better films. So there seems to be this strong evidence for age discrimination in this profession. As I said, for women, there might be a little bit of a discrimination at the beginning, but it's not as profound as we find for age. And what I think the generalization is that in an industry that's constantly in the limelight, you have the data. I can show you where to get the data that I got. And there is evidence of age discrimination. Such discrimination may be much more rampant in more opaque industries, which is practically almost everything else. So I think this is interesting and can be generalized. So in the remaining few minutes, I'm going to talk about work in progress. This is, again, about movie directors, and think again about them as project managers in charge of big project. This is with Filippo Misanotti at Kellogg, and it's work in progress. So, what I show you now might change by tomorrow, but I think the results are still there. So what are we talking about here? Firms make technological changes all the time. Decisions are made by people, but in most industries, you cannot tie very clearly the decisions to career concerns. We can do that in the film industries. And we focus on a specific change, and that is the transition from film to digital photography during the early 2000s. So here's a graph. This is digital is in red and film is in green. So you can see that in 95, there were virtually no films shot on digital. In 2015, there were virtually no films shot on film. And so it's a very quick transition that happened during this period. So what do we do with that? We have 2,460 directors who made films during the 1997, 2010. We might extend it a little bit, but you can see before 97, nothing happened. After 2010, nothing happened either. And we know what is the equipment that they use for their movie project. So we can tell whether a movie was digitally shot or it was shot on film. So what do we expect to find? What do we expect to find? We expect to try to tie it to career concerns. And we have a little model which we might drop or expand, but the general idea is that new technology, and that was digital at the beginning of the 2000s, this was a really risky choice for a first-time director. Now, keep in mind, this is a profession. One strike and you're out. You do a film that doesn't work out, you're out of the profession. So on the other hand, you might think, well, you know, if they do something and it works well, they now become proficient in new technology. And there are some industry stories that go with that. Somebody that I talked to is very well-known executive told me that first-time directors have lower opportunity cost in going to digital because of the fact that basically, you know, they will not get access in their first film to the best film technology, which is very expensive, like 65 millimeters and so on. So there are some reasons for this direction. That direction, for a more experienced director, it's clearly not as risky a choice. I mean, you're judged by the average of your performance. So if one film doesn't work out, you just go back to what you used to do before. On the other hand, they may be more conservative with high opportunity cost of switching to new technology. So this is preliminary results, and I said I don't think those will change, but you know, we're going to refine it and look at a lot more things. The interesting thing is that it is really driven by first-time directors. So if you think about it, it's not totally obvious that, you know, when a new technology is introduced, a lot of people are still shooting on film. First-time directors are going to take the risk of using this new technology. But that's what we find, and I guess it is supporting the idea that they wanted to get into the new technology and try something else. So here are some regression. That's LPM on digital adoption. So you see more or less the same picture. Previous films are negative. So the number of previous films you've shot, your experience is negative. And this is, as you see in columns 4, 5, and 6, this is in particular true for the period 2000 and to 2006. After 2006, it doesn't matter. Your experience doesn't matter to the adoption decision. And we think it's interesting because in 2007, this is the economics of it. In 2007, there was finally an agreement between theater owners and between studios on digital projection. So digital projection was there, but it was expensive, and the theater said, why should we spend money? You know, we're saving you all the shipping cost of the films. So that went on for about a while, and in 2007, there's an agreement and a big growth in digital projection, which made the opportunity cost of film even higher. So we think that this is interesting. This is a technological break that happened there. And as perhaps expected, as I said, we can follow these people from the beginning of their career, those who had technical expertise, who worked in technical professions, you know, were more likely to adopt digital. So we believe that this effect of career concerns and technology adoption may be generalized. Decisions are always implemented by people. Very often we cannot follow them in their career concerns, and we have no data, but here we have data, and hopefully we can draw some conclusions and extend this experiment as well. So this is more or less what I wanted to tell you. The creative industries allow you to learn about the value of human capital. I discussed work that shows you how to quantify the value of major player to organization. Studies on film directors provide insight on the value of project managers to their projects with granular data. And looking at this granular data, we can study discrimination, and we can show how our career concerns are important to technology adoption. So I encourage everybody to look at the creative industries, and fundamentally everything is creative. Papers are creative, a new car is creative, new design for kitchen appliances, everything is creative. So therefore we think the results are generalizable. And we live in an interesting period these days, and there's kind of a natural experiment going on in the creative industries where everything is going into streaming. So I'm sure there will be some interesting data that would allow us to study new fields. And I hope we all stay healthy and are able to proceed with the new data in new areas of inquiry. So I really thank you for your attention. I'm very honored to be here. And if there are any questions, I'll be happy to answer. I think I should stop sharing. So Hanji, if there are any questions.
Yeah, Avri, we kind of running out of time, but I say let's maybe take one or two questions, I guess.
Okay. So
because
you
we're
want to
supposed to
read the
stop
question? Yeah, we're supposed to stop it in 5 minutes, right?
we're supposed to stop at 1:20.
Okay, so we're past the time.
Yeah.
So, but we started late. So let's.
Yeah, we started late. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you see a good question, just give me one good question you can read or two, and then I'll answer very briefly, and then we can move on.
So let me get Jiasun to speak. And is Jiasun still here? And he has a question. Let me see whether I can find.
Angie,
I do have a comment.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I found the age thing interesting. I didn't know that. But I think that in order for you to establish discrimination, you really have to show me the performance, right? Performance on different the right. You mentioned that the older guys perform better. Now at this point that I want to see the statistical significance.
Right. So
if you show that the older guys strongly, statistically significantly much better than the younger guy, yeah, then I'm sold by this.
But Jigu, what if they're doing exactly the same, let's say?
Then there's no discrimination.
Why not? Because then you still are less likely to be hired if you're older.
Well, because think about the profit maximization. I'm just higher up until the point where the marginal productivity matches the cost.
So you're talking now about cost, basically.
I'm imagining that I'm making hiring decision based on equalize the marginal benefit.
Yeah, of course. I mean, we all agree to this, but the marginal benefit. But basically, let's suppose that they're equally likely. So the age. So if let's say they're all equal, so that what I controls for everything, and they're equal. Age doesn't matter. So somebody who's 60, somebody who's 40, are exactly the same. So there shouldn't be any significance in an age variable. It should be zero. If it were zero, I wouldn't say there is discrimination. Why would you think that the marginal productivity of somebody who's older is lower?
So that's, I think you need to see the performance. So there's
we have that. This is all controlled for, and we also have the performance by age. So I think, I'm happy to send you the paper, and I hope you'll be more convinced.
Sure.
I hope you'll be more convinced.
So Avri, I think Jason has a question and David has a question. Maybe we should get Jason speak first.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you for the opportunity. So I just have one question about whether are there any differences in contracting terms across various groups? I guess there are probably no in gender, but maybe in age, because just if we think things in the dynamic contracting framework. So could that just be differences? If there are any differences, could the difference in various across different groups in contracting terms explain some of your results?
Yeah, right. So unfortunately, one thing that we don't have, and I didn't advertise what we don't have, is the salaries of everybody. So it could be, in theory, that older people want more money, and that they want to be, and that's why you don't hire them. So we were asked this when I presented it. I forgot where. Now the truth is, the salary that a director gets relative to the budget of the film is very small. It's like below 1% typically. So you have to tell me that somebody is very productive and it's getting 50% more, let's say. But that's like between 0.5% to 0.75%. You're going to screw your $100 million film because you don't want to pay this. So I think that, because the salaries are so low, it is the feeling in the industry, and it's my feeling as well, that they don't make that much of a difference in terms of your decision. You do look at the productivity. As Jigu said, if somebody's doing a good job, that's what you want, because you think about it, the productivity is making your film between 100 to 150 million, and you pay much less than that. In general, the directors don't get a big chunk, with some exceptions, of course, don't get a big chunk of the profits of the film. David, one last question, I guess.
It's actually related. Are you suggesting that the industry shoots itself in the foot? Usually, I have high respect to industry of finding the right thing. And if it seems that they don't do the right thing, I look at agency issues, agendas, that actually they do the right thing, but not with respect to what we think about. So what's going on here?
So there are lots. So since we don't have a lot of time, I can tell you a lot of institutional story, but you can ask the same question about any paper that shows any discrimination. There are tons of papers about entrepreneurship and women. Why are women not getting enough access to funding, as several papers show? They also are shooting themselves in the foot. So you can ask this about any paper that shows discrimination. Why there is age discrimination. So I showed you these pictures. There's some stories that go with that. In general, people believe that financiers want to work with people more or less their own age. So when you get to be older, that's what happens. And by the way, David, I don't want to say it for the record, but I guess it is recorded. I think in our industry, there certainly is some age discrimination as well, along the same lines, that people with the same qualifications, might not land an equally good job. So you can ask that about any display of discrimination, and it is bad. If you believe my results, assuming that everything holds.
Do you think there is something that I call managerial moral hazard in the following sense? If you hire an older director and fail, you will be asked, why did you hire an older guy? And if you hire a young director and fail, okay, you hired a young director. Is there an issue?
I think if anything, it's the opposite. If you hire Martin Scorsese and the picture fails, nobody will blame you. Say, if you hire David Feldman, first-time director, and give him $50 million and the movie does $2,000 in the box office, your job is history. So I think, if anything, it goes the opposite way.
But you will not give an unknown person the high money.
No. But I'm just giving you as an example, David. But, somebody who is qualified, but his first time has never directed any big